Hello, everyone. My name is Piotr Menclewicz, and I work at GetInData, where I work mostly on data analytics and data science projects. And today I want to talk about data-driven, how to help companies to be more data-driven. And this concept by itself is quite interesting because if you ask any person from data field or outside data field, most people agree that it's important to be data driven and that almost any company should aspire to be data driven. But if you ask the same people what it actually means to be data driven, they will often give you different answers. And those answers will often miss one thing that we believe is crucial to make really data driven companies. And I will explain this one thing using an example of these two companies. So these are real companies from about 15 years ago that were trying to create a search engine. And if you think about what's important to create a good search engine, one of the crucial things is your index, like how many pages you have indexed and how many pages you can use to return relevant results. So no wonder that these companies use metrics related to this index in order to measure their performance. The first metric is index size. How big is my index? And the second one is index cost, which means how much basically does it cost me to build my index? And if you look at the numbers, you will notice that company on the left has index of 120 billion pages, and company on the right has index of only 40 billion pages, which is 3 times lower. And at the same time, it costs the company on the right 10 times more to create this index. So at this point, you might ask yourself a question. Looking at these numbers, which company do you think is more likely to fail? And it's quite obviously the second one. The only catch here is that if we uncover these companies, turns out that this company is Google, while the other company is Cool. You probably haven't heard about this company, and you never will, because unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. Although, back in the days, the expectations towards this company were really high. They had a very promising product, which was in fact called by some respected media outlets a Google killer. They had a great team of founders. Those were people who previously were working on search index at such institutions like Google, Stanford, or IBM. And they also had lots of resources. Actually, in 2008, this company was called the most successful startup in the entire US based on the amount of funding raised. So seemingly, they had all it takes to achieve a big success. So what happened? If you dive a bit deeper into this story, you will find out that the people at Kuel, they actually thought they knew what their users wanted. And they even used some data points, they defined some metrics to track it. But it turned out that in reality, that was just assumption. That was just their opinion that was not verified in reality. So when users later had a chance to test Kuel, they didn't like it at all. Turns out that the metrics that the company used, that they thought they need to optimize to beat Google, were irrelevant for the users. And what mattered for the users the most was experience. And that was no match to the Google's ones. Because Kuel at this point in time was very slow, it was buggy, and it was returning with results. So if you try to think about the root causes of why it happened, one of the reasons is that the metrics that the company optimized were not well aligned with goals of this company. But if you think about it even more, you will find out that these metrics were misaligned because there was no external feedback. So Joshua Levy, which was one of the first people who worked at Kuel and former director of engineering, actually shared that one of the key lessons that he has learned from this experience was importance of using external feedback. And I will stop here for a moment, because if you think fundamentally what the data allows you to do, it basically allows you to collect feedback from the world. And it is the best way to do it that I know, because data doesn't have any opinions, data doesn't have any intuitions, data is just pure facts that you can use. So if you compare how does it feel to be a part of data-driven company versus non-data-driven company, you will feel that running non-data-driven company is a bit like driving this car. For those of you who doesn't recognize it, that is car that back in the days in 90s were very popular in Poland. And in this car, you need to do basically everything manually. And I'm not even talking about some fancy stuff, like, for example, like emergency braking or something like that. Even before you turn on this car, you need to pull this lever on the left in order to turn on suction, whatever it means. So it's really, you have basically no help from technology to help you drive on your journey. Versus driving a data-driven company feels more like driving this car, where the biggest things on your mind are basically choosing a goal of your destination. And even though this car won't take you there without any interventions, it will do everything that it can to assist you. It will help you to select the best route. It will help you to react to some dangers on the road, and so on. And if we translate it into companies, you will see that companies that are not data-driven rely heavily on intuition. They make many decisions manually, and they build their understanding of the world, of their internal processes, of their customers, based on anecdotal examples. While companies that are data-driven, they don't use intuition, they don't use opinions, then they use evidence. They automate decisions where possible, and also they build their understanding of the world by using digital twins. And by digital twins, I mean basically using data to represent entities that are important for the company, like maybe like factories or users, in a form of data. And in order to go from this world on the left to the world on the right, you need two things. And these are the same things that helped to put the first astronauts on the moon. The first thing is technology. And I believe that we live in a days that thankfully we can say that we have technology that can help companies to be data-driven. And the second thing that is needed to make it happen is a process. On this picture on the right, you can see a graph of an astronaut. And on this graph, you have every steps written down that are needed to do some procedure. So it would be much easier for companies to progress on their data-driven journeys if they also knew what steps they need to make. But unfortunately, at this point in time, I don't think that is the case. I think that currently we have some leaders who know perfectly well how to be data-driven, and we have the rest of the companies who try to do it. But whenever you try to read about how to be data-driven company, you will see that you need to take care of this and that, but there's no step-by-step plan how to do it. And that's why we decided to create a process that will help you to get from I want to use my data more effectively to I have a plan to do it in just 3 steps. And before I dive into these 3 steps, I want to talk about 2 things that I've briefly mentioned. The first one is technology, and the second one is basically definition. So I would like to align on what we mean when we talk about data-driven companies. So I said that I think that technology that enables companies to be data-driven is already there. So how do I know? I think I know it because at GetInData, we implement these technologies every day. And nowadays, with open source and with cloud, you are capable of going from little to no data capabilities to having modern data platform that supports all the core data needs and more in just a few months. And we know that because we have helped companies to build such capabilities. One of the examples is Vault. That is a fintech startup that when we started working together, had basically no dedicated tools to drive data processes. And after just 4 months, they ended up with a platform that is capable of serving all their data needs, like data ingestion, data transformation, storing data, or using some tools to deliver this data to the end users. And I'm not even talking about, fulfilling these needs in a basic way. I mean the modern solutions. So for example, if you take a BI tool, this tool allows even non-technical users to explore data on their own. So just like today, every one of us can sit down in the evening and watch basically any show by using his favorite app. Also, any one of us can sit down, set up an account in one of the cloud providers, and start experimenting with the latest technologies that are available. With current technology, you can even build simple machine learning models using simple SQL. And I'm not trying to claim that experimenting on your own, on your local machine, is the same as building solutions that are production ready. It takes basically many people who have deep data experience to make this process so seamless. But I'm just trying to stress out that probably it has never been, we had never such good capabilities in terms of technology as we have today. Okay, so that is, I think, one of the first things that should help companies to make decisions, to take the first steps to become data-driven. And in order to have a good understanding so that everyone has the same definition of data-driven, I will try to explain what do I mean when I say data-driven. At the very start, I said that if you ask different people what they mean when they talk about data-drivenness, you will get different answers. They may talk, or you may read, about collecting data, or about building data strategy, or about developing data skills, or about implementing some data tools. But if you reflect for a few moments about these points, you may come to the conclusion that these are rather prerequisites than the end goal, because no amount of data will provide you value if you don't use it. You can have the best platform in the world, but if your user doesn't use this platform, they do not make decisions based on the data that you expose to them, you will see no business value. So the alternative definition that you can find is about using data to make decisions and then taking actions based on these decisions. And that seems actually pretty accurate, but it's missing one thing. And that thing is that it is entirely possible to use data to make decisions and still make mistakes, still be wrong. So that's why we feel that this definition is missing an important component. And that's why we have decided to expand it to create a full feedback loop. When after you make a decision, you collect the data from the world to understand outcomes of this decision. You draw conclusions based on this data. And when you have this new knowledge, when you learn from your experience, you can later decide if you are satisfied with this decision or if you want to reiterate the process. So when we talk about data-drivenness, we actually think about using those full feedback loops in order to build better and better understanding and making better and better decisions. And you don't have to apply this process, obviously, to every decision in your company. You can apply it at different levels. It's entirely possible to make to focus on individual decision processes that are core to your business, or that some teams are more data-driven than others within the same company. Actually, I would say that if you look at the different companies, it's quite rare that the whole company, all the teams within this company are equally data-driven. It's often the case that different units have different data maturity. And usually those units that are closer to the core business, they are the leaders that others can learn from. And this is actually quite a good news because it means that you can build your data-driven capabilities in an iterative way. So I would argue that your data-driven journey is very unlikely to look like this. I don't say that it's impossible, but it's very unlikely that you are able to define all the steps that you need to make in order to be data-driven in the next 2 years, and that you will just execute these steps and you will become data-driven company. I think that it's more likely that your journey will look like this. When you take multiple smaller steps, you build your data capabilities, you utilize them, and when you find new bottlenecks or new opportunities, you take the next step, and so on and so on. So that is actually a pretty good place to start talking about the process that you can apply to make it happen. And as I said, the process that we have came up with has 3 steps. And the first step of this process is diagnosis. Diagnosis allows you to basically answer 2 questions. The first question, where I am today? And the second question, what are the realistic goals that I should pursue in the near future? Because you need those 2 things in order to design or plan a route that you will take to get there. And in many cases, like figuring out where you are currently, it's pretty obvious, but it's not that obvious when you think about data-drivenness. And that's because this concept of being data-driven company, it spans around different areas of your company. For example, when you try to figure out how much data matures a given company, you may wonder about, for example, how much data do they collect, or if they use this data to make decisions, or what data technologies do they use, and so on. And if you wanted to do it every time and you try to progress on data-driven journey, or if any company had to do it on their own, it is quite a challenging task because there are so many things to consider. That's why we decided to group them into these 5 dimensions: leadership, culture, analytics, data, technology. And we decided to create a survey that helps you go over all the aspects that you need to take into consideration in order to find out how data-driven is your company. So in this survey, for each and every dimension, we ask multiple questions that usually have 5 possible answers. And after you go over all the dimensions and all the questions, you will build a good understanding of your current data capabilities. Looking at this example, you can see that this particular company is quite well suited when it comes to leadership and analytics, but it has some bottlenecks when it comes to technology and data. So these are, when you look at it at a very high level, these are probably the areas of focus for this company in the next steps. So you have this high level understanding, but you don't actually yet understand what exactly do you need to do to progress on this journey. So how can you find out? I will show you now a sample question from our data-driven survey. This question asks about reporting capabilities, which is just 1 of 20. In reality, we ask similar questions about other things like culture, skills, data literacy at your company, data democratization, all sorts of things. This is just for illustration. And in this question, you can see that you can select one of the few options to figure out how data-driven is your company. First, the first answer is about not having any dedicated tools for reporting at all. The second one is about relying heavily on simple tools like spreadsheets. At the third level, we talk about BI tool that allows your users to have interactive access to data. The next one talks about your data users being able to explore data on their own. And finally, we talk about innovative ways to get to the insights from data. And if you analyze these answers, you will see that the order of these answers is not random. They are actually ranked from the lowest to the highest data maturity. And we did it on purpose. This way of building questions is called a Goodman scale. And it allows you to actually use the question itself to help you navigate the next steps that you may want to take. So if we look at the example, you can see that our company is at level 2. It is heavily relying on spreadsheets to deliver insights to the end users. So the recommendation from the next step for this company might be to implement a BI tool to allow the users to interact with data, to make the reports more robust, which is actually quite an interesting insight. But that is not everything, because if you analyze this question further, you will see that even the next level might be within your reach, because the next level is basically about self-service, about making your tool, about enabling, about capability of your tool to allow non-technical users to explore data on their own. So if you are planning to implement a BI tool anyway, maybe you can already take this criterion into account when selecting a BI tool. So this way, you may at best case avoid implementing a new BI tool in the future. Another path that might be quite interesting is that if you start with no data capabilities at all, you don't have to go through all the steps. What you can do is you can basically skip the intermediate steps and skip the pain points that you can see there, in order to start with the robust tools from the first basically approach. So that's what happened at Vault, where the company that I've shown you at the very beginning, they had no data capabilities, and then they went directly to the modern data stack. So what you do in order to set your goals, you go through every question within every dimension. And at the end of this process, you have first a high-level understanding of your aspirations. And secondly, you have an actionable list of capabilities that you may want to build in order to progress on the data-driven scale. And knowing about these capabilities is actually the first thing that will allow you to start building your data-driven roadmap. But you still need the second one. And the second thing is the entire focus of the second step of the process, which is discovery phase. If you think about capabilities, what they do is they actually enable you to start getting some value from the data, but they yet do not guarantee getting this value, because by themselves, they do not provide it. So for example, if you implement a BI tool, but you don't have the reports there, or your user do not use them, you will see no value at all. So this step is actually about planning business use cases to be included in your data-driven roadmap. And by business use cases, I mean initiatives that are focused on generating business value. So you may want to, for example, to plan building a 360 view of your customers. So you have a very good understanding what features make some people like your services and your products. And you may use this knowledge to design a marketing campaign to find more such people that are similar and increase your sales. Another business example of business use case might be building a churn model. So nowadays we live in quite a difficult times because we have a basically global recession, inflation. So when you know that acquiring new customers is significantly more expensive than retaining the current ones, you can build a model that could help you detect the customers that are the most likely to leave your company, and maybe help them see the benefits of staying with you by offering, for example, some discounts or some special offers. And what we recommend is to actually include these business initiatives very early on in your data roadmap, basically as soon as possible. Because if you do it, you gain two things. First of all, the risk of your entire transformation is lower because you build capabilities, you build tools, and you test them on the go. So if there is something missing, you find out about it very early in the process. And secondly, it allows you to decrease the cost of the entire transformation, because by definition, business use cases are focused on providing business value. So this business value helps you to lower the cost of the overall cost of your data efforts. And also it has more non-tangible benefits, because if you are able to showcase some value early in the process, you are more likely to build trust and to build the momentum to your data transformation in your company. Okay, so now I think you know that we recommend to include business use cases in your data roadmap as soon as possible. But how can you get these ideas? To generate ideas for use cases, we recommend using a process that is inspired by how movie studios test stories. So no movie studio creates an entire movie in order to test some story. What happens there is they usually generate plenty of ideas. Some of them are really bad, and then they ruthlessly select the ideas that are the best in order to create the final movie. So if you look at the ideas from the very beginning of the process and you compare it with the final product, you might not even recognize that this is the same thing. And actually, this process was brought to the business through design thinking. And there are two components that we can also use here. And these are divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is about generating as many ideas as possible. So at this point, you want to write down every little idea that comes to your mind, no matter if it's crazy or if it seems very risky. You just try to come up with as many ideas as you can and write them down. And the next step of that process, convergent thinking, is about filtering this list and selecting the best ideas that you will actually implement. So let's start with divergent thinking. How can this process look in practice? The first and the most obvious thing that you can do in order to find ideas for your business use cases is to ask your people. Because they work at your company on a daily basis, if there are any processes that are inefficient, they are probably aware of them. But you can do more in order to foster the creativity and to help people think beyond what's the most obvious ideas. And in order to do it, what we recommend is organizing some workshops when you propose different exercises that help your people to look at data opportunities from different perspectives. For example, one idea might be to try to break down your revenue streams into individual components. So, for example, if you have an e-commerce business, you may break the revenue stream into things like how many people buy from me, what's the average value of the transaction, and some other things like what's my commission, or what's the success rate of transactions. And if you do it this way, you will notice that while you are trying to really break this down, you already have some ideas for optimizations that you could apply. And I can say that we have tested this in practice, where we were developing ideas for one of our clients, where first we had a team of data scientists who were trying to generate some ideas on their own. And later on, and we of course had some ideas, and later on we tried to do this exercise. We tried to break down the revenue and cost streams. And it turned out that we were able to add basically the same amount of ideas that we already have to the pool just by trying to do this exercise. And that is just one idea for exercise. There are many of them. Like another approach might be to write down flows of your core processes that you have at your company. So this way you might actually notice what are the bottlenecks that you face, what are the biggest problems, where you can do some optimizations. You can either try to educate your people by explaining them how, the basic analytical concepts. So for example, what's a classification, what's a regression, what's a time series forecasting. So when they try to understand these concepts, like naturally, they will try to think, where would that work? Where would that help me? And it may turn out that they will add even more ideas to a pool of ideas. So eventually, if you are creative enough, you will end up with probably more ideas that you know what to do with. And that is a great point in time to switch from divergent thinking to convergent thinking and start filtering these ideas. Okay. So now we are at the point that we have multiple ideas generated. And first thing that is quite useful to acknowledge is that if you have 50 ideas, you probably won't implement all of them. You are most likely to implement 1, 2, maybe 3 ideas in practice. So it's really not that important if given idea is 49th on the list or 50th on the list. So what we try to do in the first attempt is we try to very quickly filter these ideas to the most promising ones. So actually you can define 3 buckets: the promising bucket, high risk and high reward, and backlog, and try to quickly assign these ideas to these buckets. And you can do it if you're still during the workshop, you can use like a simple voting in order to do this grouping very quickly. So to the promising bucket, you will put all the ideas that seem the most that have the biggest potential to deliver value in your company. High risk, high reward are the ideas that seem very promising, but also you are not sure if they are even viable, if it's possible to deliver them. And any idea that doesn't make it to either the first bucket or the second bucket goes to backlog. And if you do this quickly, I will show you what you can do with ideas from every bucket. Okay, so we will start with the backlog. So in backlog, you have ideas that were at the first look, they seem the least promising. So what you can do with them is you can leave them in backlog and maybe revise them again when in the next iteration of the process. Or if there are any ideas that maybe you don't feel confident that should be in backlog, offline after the workshops, you can revise them and you can verify if they really shouldn't make it to the promising or high risk, high reward category. When we talk about high risk, high reward ideas, the best thing to address them is to build some prototypes. Because if you build a prototype and you try to solve this problem in the easiest way that comes to your mind, you will learn about the problems that you may stumble upon, and you can check if it's actually viable to address these ideas. And the promising ones, the list of the most promising cases, it does require some additional steps. Because at this point, you might have maybe 5 to 10 ideas, and you may want to start with just maybe 1, 2, or 3. So for these ideas, you can do something that we called back of the napkin calculation, which is a slightly more accurate estimation. And you start with the most fundamental things. You start by comparing the expected impact of implementing these ideas and cost. And during the workshop, you might not have, the exact numbers, or you might not be able to calculate these things in dollar value, but you can use some proxies or some heuristics to try to evaluate these 2 things. So for example, if you have 2 ideas and one of them is likely to affect 0.001% of your users, and you have the second idea who is likely to affect 20% of your users, the second one has obviously a bigger potential to deliver some impact. When it comes to the costs, of course, it's the same thing. During the workshop, you try to do it very quickly. So you don't need to come up with the exact dollar values. What you can do as a proxy, you can try to estimate how long it may take to deliver these ideas. And that will also give you some understanding of how costly they are. So these are the main two criteria that you should take into consideration, but there are also two that are especially important if this is the very first data efforts that you do. Because if these are the first efforts that you do, what you need to have in mind is that some people might be reluctant to actually switching to the new processes because it's completely different thing, untested. They don't know if they will see any value at all. So if you plan first business use cases, it might be prudent to start with the use cases that are relatively low risk, and relatively quickly can showcase some value. So that's why you can do some relative estimations of how risky different ideas are in your opinion. And secondly, how much time do you think they will take to complete? And if you go over these four criteria, you can create some ranking of ideas, and you can initially select the first one that you recommend to implement during your transformation. And finally, after the first step, which is diagnosis, after defining business use cases, it's time to start preparing yourself for the implementation. And in order to prepare yourself for the implementation, there are a couple of things to have in mind. The first thing is to basically translate the needs, the capabilities that you have identified before into specific tools. So if you know, for example, that you will try to implement a tool to allow you to develop machine learning models, let's try to think like what tool that will be. If you try to implement technology for ingesting data, you need to do the same thing. You need to know what tool that will be. So basically, you need to define the architecture of your solutions that you will implement. The second thing is you make the final choice where it comes to business initiatives, because as I said, during workshops, we build the very rough understanding of what is important and what is not. Later, after they're completed, you can do some additional checks offline where you can, check in data, recalculate the numbers, and you can come up with the revised estimations. And based on these revised estimations, you can make the final choice. And these are the two main things that you need to take in mind. And later you can, of course, plan the scope of the initiatives, the people that will help you deliver them, and the timelines. So based on that, you will create a roadmap that may look like this, and it starts to actually launch the implementation and start delivering these initiatives. Why delivering these initiatives? It's good to have in mind two things. The first thing is managing the whole transformation at three levels. At the level of individual initiative, so we need to make sure that project management is done right. At the level of the entire transformation, so the whole portfolio of initiatives, the entire program, and also at the level of data products, because the result of business initiatives will be some data products that business users will use. So so you need to make sure that they will, whatever you create will meet their needs. And also it's good to already think about organizing some process to monitor if you are going in the right direction. So this might be tracking some metrics on a regular basis, or this might be having a regular check-in meetings in order to evaluate if everything is going as you planned. So to basically summarize what I've just said, I will give you some closing thoughts. And the main message from me for today is that current times are difficult. So when you live in a difficult times, it's quite prudent to try to do more with less. And I've already shown you that technology that we have today actually allows you to build your technical capabilities relatively quickly. Furthermore, I have shown how you can use a process, a three-step process, in order to pragmatically plan your transformation in a way that you're able to showcase the value early on, and that you make decisions that are iterative and that are oriented or on short-term gains for your company. And the stake of following these two things are, for most companies, it's maybe staying ahead of the competition, or maybe even maybe maintaining the current position, or even going in front of your competition. For other companies like Cool, it might be even survival. But what I wanted to say that today, basically anyone can start thinking about using data or getting more benefits from data. And to make this a little bit easier, we tried to share with you the data-driven survey that we have designed in order to help our clients to be more data-driven. So if you use this QR code, or if you use the link that you will receive after the webinar, you can fill in the data-driven survey, and you can receive a summary report tailored to your company with some comments from the data experts in order to figure out where you are in your current data-driven journey and what next steps you may consider. Also, because this is basically a very early stage of us sharing this with the outside world, if you want to share some feedback, or if you need some help with interpretation of these results, we are happy to set up some knowledge sharing sessions and help you go through the report that you will receive. So at this point, I will thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them. Okay, and the first question that I can see is, which data-driven dimension do you think is the most important? And I would say that it's a bit tough question, because on one hand, there is some hierarchy that is good to follow. So for example, you won't be able to do any analytics unless you collect the data, or it doesn't make sense to deploy fancy tools to process this data if you don't have it. So I would say that for sure there is some hierarchy to follow there. You start with data, then you move to building tools. With tools and with data, you are able to build some analytical products. And when you are able to deliver insights, you can already start education your organization of how they can use this data to make better decisions. But on the other hand, it's a bit like asking what is more important, breathing or having food. So short term, without breathing, you will live shorter, but in the long term, both are important and both are necessary. So it's hard to actually say about one dimension that is above the others. I want to thank you very much for the attention. It was a very great experience to be able to talk to you today.